Hi, my name is Ethan Serrani, and I'm doing political polling stations and their proximity to voters. Problem definition. Polling and access to voting has become a large issue in U.S. politics over the last few years. Many people argue that voting locations are less accessible to the public, leading to lower voter turnouts than in other nations. This particularly also affects low-income voters. Firstly, I would like to investigate if polling stations are accessible to residents of Philadelphia, as well as investigate if different kinds of transportation have different levels of access to polling stations. The goal is to observe polling locations and see which areas are underserved and if there are adequate locations for those who need other forms of transportation systems besides cars for many reasons like expense, disability, age, etc. And this is important because everyone should have access to polling locations, as it's important that we all have the same ability to participate in our democratic system. Setting up our data, I started by getting the census tracts from PASDA for Philadelphia County. I then got the street center lines from Open Philly Data and added them as well. Finally, I got the polling locations in Philadelphia and got that from Open Philly Data as well. With the very basic stuff done, I began setting up my network data set, and then after that using the analysis tools. So to start, I created the network dataset by making a feature dataset which contained my street center lines from the earlier slide. I then used that to create the network dataset using the Create Network Dataset tool. And after that, I went into the preferences and changed a few things. Mostly just set the cost to miles, so that way we would work with miles within our next steps when we're using analysis. With all this complete, I began the analysis, and for that I used the network analysis to create a service area of 1 mile around each polling station within Philadelphia, and it produced the map on the right. I then started by downloading the census demographics for population, which after some trimming, I just had the total population for each census tract. And then I joined it with my census tracts that I was already using, and then I used the select by location tools to get all the tracts which were within the service area, and then got rid of them and kept the tracts that were outside of our service area. I then used the calculate tool to get rid of the tracts that had less than 10 population within them, giving me the map on the right. And when I summarized all the data, it gave me around like 50,000 residents that were outside of the service area for polling stations that were within 1 mile of a drive too. So previously I had used center within to select by location to get our tracts that were outside of our service area, which works for a general estimate, but I didn't feel like it was giving us the exact numbers, so I wanted to do a raster analysis. I started the raster analysis by first getting a raster map. I got this from the link there, and then the map on the top showed me multiple uses of types of land use, which wasn't necessary, like grass, trees, water. We didn't need that, so I made it so that they were all black, and then changed it so buildings were a light gray/white. And this is just generally going over how to do a raster analysis. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly, just because this is pretty much the same method that we used in class. I haven't done anything different. I calculated my area for the tracts and acres, and then I set up 2 new fields to hold my cell count, my cell pop. I then used the convert raster into polygon tool to get my cell count, and then I used the then I used that to get my cell pop, and then I was using the formula total pop divided by cell count. And then I ran a mask tool to get my raster to only occur outside of my service area, and then I ran a zonal statistics tool to get the total population outside the service area, which was a total of around 95,000 people. Polling station within a walking range of a SEPTA stop. To start, I download the location of every SEPTA stop, which I then limited to the confines of Philadelphia. I then added a buffer around every polling station of 150 meters and utilized the intersect tool to locate which buffers had SEPTA stops within them. I then exported those buffers that had SEPTA stops within range and used them in the select by location tool to select polling stations, which were inside the buffers that had SEPTA stops within range. And I sorted those polling stations and turned them green. And on the map on the right, you can see the ones that are marked as green are polling stations that do have a SEPTA stop within range, and the ones that are red are ones that do not. The results are that around 1,030 polling stations had a SEPTA stop within range, and 675 polling stations had no SEPTA stop within range at all. Poverty compared with polling stations with SEPTA stops. I attempted to compare poverty with the SEPTA stops in range of a polling station. I obtained the poverty statistics from the Census Bureau as before, and then I compared them with the SEPTA stops. I found that there's some possibility of a correlation with higher income parts of the city, as seen in Center City, having more polling stations that have SEPTA stops within range in comparison to locations like North Philly, which are lower income areas, which have many polling stations with less or no SEPTA stops in range. Walkability. I used the same method as earlier to create a new network data set of walkable streets. For example, taking out highways from the street center line and editing the properties of the network data set to walking. The results was nearly 450,000 Philadelphia residents were outside of walking range of a polling station, particularly in low-income neighborhoods.